Hello everyone, Richard here at Calvin Wazoo, where I often wonder how can we sleep when our beds are burning? I am continuing a thread that I learned about from Andy Ford's channel. I think might have been started by Steve Carlson, but the thread is you show the records from specific decades that were gateway albums for you, albums that revealed to you a band or musical artist that you really, really liked, and you started collecting. What was that first album? So there's kind of some rules, and first of all, it needs to be an artist or band that has released at least 4 albums, and you must have at least 3. So I'm up to the 1980s now. I've done a video about, on this about the 1960s and about the 1970s. Now I'm up to the 1980s. You know, and there are a lot of bands that are not going to be mentioned in this video that I really love and are fantastic bands. And the reason I'm not mentioning them is because I only have maybe 1 or 2 of their albums, or I really didn't start listening to them until later in the 90s, or maybe even in the, the next century. So I'm sticking with records by musical artists that were released in the 80s and I heard for the first time in the 80s. And so we'll get started here with the first one, and that is this one here, Exit by Tangerine Dream. And they remain today a favorite in the electronic musical genre of mine, and this was a really great introduction to them. I'm not, back in the 80s when I found this record in a record store, we didn't have Discogs, we didn't have All Music Guide, we didn't have Apple and iTunes and things like that where you could sort of listen to records before you bought them. And I wasn't necessarily reading a lot of the music press. I had occasionally I read Rolling Stone. That was probably the musical publication that I read the most, but I was not really a regular reader. And then there were a couple other publications like Cream magazine, Circus. I might have looked at a copy of them, maybe once or whatever. But yeah, they're really, you had to find out by trial and error, or you got referred to a particular band or artist by a friend. So why I picked up this album, I don't know. I really don't. It was probably about it. It was a blind buy. And I don't know why. The cover is not all that interesting. It is kind of. I might have asked the store because I bought this when I was living in New Mexico. I was working at a private school up in the mountains near Santa Fe. And there was a pretty good record store in Santa Fe that I would sometimes be able to get to, but didn't buy a whole lot of records from there because I didn't have a whole lot of money to be spending on records. But I might have asked the store owner about this record or something. I don't know. I don't know why, but I am really glad that I picked up this album because it was a fantastic introduction, as I say, to not just to Tangerine Dream, but to the genre altogether. because I really hadn't listened to anything like this. This was music that completely blew my perceptions of what could be done with music in terms of electronic music. There was a lot of synth pop going on, at that time. But this isn't synth pop. No, nowhere near. Now, Tangerine Dream is a German project, and it was founded by, Edgar Frazee. And then the original lineup would have been Frazee and, Konrad Schnitzler and Klaus Schulze. And they formed in 1969. And I've got a couple records, by Klaus. I got a record by Klaus Schulze, and I have a record by Konrad Schnitzler. Now, this particular lineup has Frazee with Christopher Frank and Johannes Schmerling. And this was still a really great. This is like at the end of, I think, their peak period. Because I went back and I started exploring all the earlier records up to this one here, like Phaedra and Rubicon, and just fantastic albums, just amazing music. This has a bit of a dated sound to it, but it still is a great listen today. So yeah, this was my introduction to Tangerine Dream and the album Exit. Just fantastic, atmospheric. One of those albums you can listen to, and while you're listening, you can just let your mind drift. Okay, so let me figure out where I'm going to put my records after I talk about them. The next group, I heard them in 1979 on the radio. I heard one song by them. And that was a song that I was like, wow, what is this? And that song was Psycho Killer by the Talking Heads. But I didn't really listen to anything else by them until the 1980s when this album was released. And speaking in tongues, I tell you, this was my first Talking Heads record that I bought, and it's Remain in Light is now my favorite, but this is really close. Just a great funky album. And when I had this again, living up in the mountains with this school, about that same time the film Stop Making Sense was released. I remember going to this theater, this old Rococo style theater in Santa Fe to watch the film. It was just amazing. And the Talking Heads remain a favorite band to this day, and I've collected not their entire catalog as the Talking Heads. There's a lot of other releases that David Byrne did that were not Talking Heads, but I have most of them, and I love them all. And this was my gateway album, and it is still a favorite. Remain in Light is probably my favorite, but this is such an outstanding album as well. Now, at this time, there were two similar musical artists that I discovered about the same time. And you'll know who the second one is after I talk about this first one, because he comes later. But that's the fabulous Thunderbirds. And this was the band that was started by Jimmy Vaughan, older brother of Stevie Ray Vaughan, who had a phenomenal career. Fabulous Thunderbirds, though, this is really great stuff. This is a style of blues, Texas blues, that is slightly different in presentation and style from what Stevie Ray Vaughan did, but just as solid, just as great. And this is the album, the Gateway album, and they just make it because I don't think they had more than 4 or 5 albums, and I do have 3 of them. This one was released in 1982. Okay, I didn't mention about the others. Speaking in Tongues was released in 1982, and also Tangerine Dream Exit, that was released in 1981. But I didn't get it in 1981. That would have been in the mid 80s is when I picked it up. Anyway, back to the the Fabulous Thunderbirds. Yeah, just really, really great. This is my favorite Thunderbirds album. Still really love it. And, we've got, even has their names on here. We've got Fran, Christina, Keith Ferguson, Jimmy Vaughan, and Kim Wilson, the voice of the Fabulous Thunderbirds. And I saw Kim Wilson years later. This would have been in this century, at a roadside bar in Ottawa County, Michigan. It was pretty amazing. I did not have this vinyl copy. I had the CD copy, which I brought with me, and Kim Wilson signed it. Plus, I had a homemade burned copy of, I think it's Butt Rockin', and he signed that as well. Great stuff. This was the Gateway. And I still really enjoy listening to the Fabulous Thunderbirds. Now, when I was in the working at that school I was talking about in New Mexico, there was a year, this was 1983, so this was like my first year, I believe, working at that school. And the age group of the kids at the school would have been like roughly, junior high and high school age. And there was it was a cassette that they were playing all the time. And I just found the music fascinating. And it was like, I gotta find out, who is this group? Who is this group? And that was the Violent Femmes. And this is their eponymous debut. And I think, Blister in the Sun and Added Up were the 2 songs that I would hear being played all the time by the students at the school. And I ended up getting a cassette tape version first, because at the time I did have a cassette player. And, but I also got CDs were starting to emerge as the new format, and I was picking up a lot more CDs than vinyl. I was still picking up vinyl, but the CDs, they were more convenient. Anyway, but yeah, this record is still, all right, this was my gateway to the Violent Femmes, and this is still my favorite, to me, the number 1 album of their catalog. And I don't have their entire catalog. I have probably most of their releases. There's a few that I don't have, but I'm also not really keen on necessarily picking them up. But nonetheless, this was a great gateway album to the Violent Femmes, remains my favorite, and turned me, into a collector and lifelong listener of the Violent Femmes. About the same time, now that album was released in 1983, released the same year, and about the same time, I'm going to say probably closer to 84 is when I heard this album. This remains my favorite of this band, although they have a lot of really great records, and that is the Pretenders, who have also been known as just Pretenders, and that's Learning to Crawl. Banger of an album. This not only introduced me to the Pretenders and Chrissie Hynde, But this was an album that I had on CD, and it was being played all the time. This is a great road trip album because I did a lot of driving on breaks away from work. I was still, working in the mountains of New Mexico, but, go on drives and trips up into Colorado and around the mountains of New Mexico, road tripping through the alpine regions and the desert. And this is such a great, great recording to listen to while on that kind of road trip. But every song to me is a banger on this one. It's going to be close to a 5 out of 5 rated album for me, and it's still my favorite of the entire collection. But as I say, they have a lot of really good ones. A couple of their later albums are really, really solid, ones that have been released within like the last 5 years. But yeah, Pretenders, Learning to Crawl, that was the gateway album to their material. Now, I mentioned the fabulous Thunderbirds and Jimmy Vaughan, and I don't have this on vinyl, but I have the CD, and that's how I started listening to Stevie Ray Vaughan, and Double Trouble was on CD. And this one is also a 1983 release, and it is Texas Flood, which was the first Double Trouble album. Now, I had heard Stevie Ray Vaughan before this. It still would have been the 80s, probably around 82 or 83, before this was released, because he was getting a lot of play, at least where I was living in Tucson at the time, because I remember being in this bar in Tucson that was up on North 4th Avenue, I think, and I can't remember the name of the bar. There was a country honky tonk that I used to hang out at up there, but then there was this other bar that would get live music in, and I think that's probably the one. I was there to see this band from Phoenix called The Pills, who later changed their name to Gentlemen After Dark. They were kind of a punk band, and then they became a glam band after that. And I've been looking for their records because I want to collect them, because it's just that something from my background that I remember. Anyway, I was there for a show at this bar of Gentlemen After Dark. I think they had changed their name by then. And you know how they play music before the band comes out and plays. And so what they were playing was Stevie Ray Vaughan. And I kept thinking, wow, is this Jimi Hendrix? Is this a Jimi Hendrix record that I haven't heard before? And, no, this was Stevie Ray Vaughan. Just absolutely blew my mind. And so when this was released in 1983, I picked it up, and I have been, I don't rate him anymore in terms of the best, or my favorite or best guitarist ever, because, he's dead. Okay, so he's there with Jimi Hendrix, and other guitarists who have passed. Okay, I don't even bother to rank them anymore. When I talk about my favorite guitarists and who are the best guitarists, jazz or rock or blues, I stick with living ones. Okay, because hey, his playing is immortal. But yeah, just absolutely amazing. And he is one of the musical artists that I have seen live 3 times. There's not many that I have seen that many times. And one of the best times was while I was living there in New Mexico, and he played a place in Santa Fe called Palo Solari, which is no longer there. But that was just an absolutely outstanding performance. And that was about the time that, what was the live album called? Live Alive, something like that. And so that recording, that live recording, is pretty much the set list that he played at that show. And it was just brilliant. So yeah, this is the gateway album, the debut with Double Trouble, Texas Flood. You know, a lot of people criticize, or I won't say, well, they poo-poo some of his later releases that came shortly after the debut, as just not being as good. I still really love them, even though, yeah, that was when he was in the throes of his alcoholism and things were starting to spiral out of control. But I still really like those records, like Couldn't Stand the Weather and the other releases. But this was the gateway, Texas Flood. Just what a great album. All right, so a lot of records from 1983 that made major impacts on me, and there's another one that was released in 1983 that blew me away, and this is U2 War. Now, I had heard, would have been in 79 when it was released, songs from their debut Boy. And I remember hearing them, but because it was a neighbor of mine who had that. So I would hear that on occasion, and I remember really, really liking it. And the song I Will Follow was played on the radio all the time. But this was my gateway album to U2. And this is still, an amazing album. It is recorded, to me, it's recorded very differently from the later albums. There's very different sound with the mixes, particularly with something like Joshua Tree, which I kind of feel like, I mean, this is a great album, but I really like Joshua Tree. Oh, man. But yeah, this is the album that got me started. Most of my collection of U2 is on CD, but I guess a lot of people, got, I think they had a personality conflict with Bono, and Bono can be pretentious and a little bit much. Not quite as bad as Sting, but nonetheless, I do really like even many of the albums that came after Joshua Tree. But this one is still up there, and this was my gateway, and just a completely remarkable album and recording. Okay, moving on. Finally, we're getting to some later years in the 1980s, and that's 1987. And that was with the release of this, Diesels and Dust by Midnight Oil. I was infatuated with Midnight Oil after listening to this. It was the same kind of infatuation that I had when I first was listening to the Police. I mean, to me, the Police were everything. And then there was a period where Midnight Oil, they were everything to me. I loved everything and wanted to collect as much as I possibly could of their records. Most of which in the beginning I was collecting on CD, and I've been gradually bringing in, vinyl recordings when I find them. But this one is not only a super solid, amazing, tight album. It is, to me, of the caliber of something like Who's Next. It's like the quintessential Midnight Oil album. The way Who's Next is the quintessential Who album, in my opinion. It's just solid all the way through. Every single song, a banger. It just never lets up. You know, when listening to this, it can be exhausting by the time I get to the end. Just an absolutely amazing. I had an opportunity to see them live here in Chicago, and it was turned out to be like their final tour, and I didn't go to the show, and I should have, because it was at a venue very close to me, and I thought it was sold out, but I learned later that they still, if you showed up the day of the show, they still had tickets available that they would sell. And yeah, it's one of the times I really regret not going to see the show, because, as I said, for many years, Midnight Oil was everything to me. Just great music, and especially that album. So that was 1987. And then I was still living in New Mexico, primarily in the mountains. And again, I go back to that school I was working at. There were a couple fellow employees there, but also a few of the students who were listening to a band at that time called R.E.M. Okay? And, you know, they were talking about how great the band was. And this would have been about the time the album Green was released. But this was my introduction. The compilation known as Eponymous. And that, I listened to this so often and so much, and it launched me on collecting. I think the next album I bought was Green, because that was released during that time. And then I started collecting everything by R.E.M. that was subsequently released. I didn't start going back in the catalog for many years because of this. Was such a great compilation. I didn't feel any urgent call to collect the earlier releases. And then when I did, and I started picking up the earlier releases, I started realizing, wow, these are different mixes of a lot of the songs on here. And then, of course, it says on here, like Radio Free Europe is the original high-tone single release. Gardening at Night is a different vocal mix. There was Finest Work Song is the Mutual drum horn mix. So yeah, these were different mixes of these earlier songs. And so when I picked up the earlier albums, I was really quite surprised by how different the album version sounded than what I had heard on this compilation. But yes, okay, yeah, this was the gateway for me to R.E.M. And I've got pretty close to everything, either on CD or on vinyl. I've got a lot of their releases on vinyl. And then some of the ones that, the weaker ones, you might say, I have on CD. Like Up. Up is a good one, but, I have it on CD. I'm not so sure I want to buy it on vinyl. Anyway, here's the gateway to R.E.M. Saw them here in Chicago about the time the album Accelerate was released, and that was such an amazing show. Such an amazing show. Just one of the top 3 concerts I'd ever been to, because of the energy they conveyed from the stage and the energy that they were getting returned from the audience. It was just absolutely an amazing show. And then another one from 1988, and the final one for this particular video. And I originally owned this on cassette at first, and that's this Trinity Sessions by the Cowboy Junkies. This is another one of those albums that I don't remember why I got it. I think I might have heard it before. Although I don't know if anybody at the school that I worked at was playing it or listening to it. And we didn't have radio. There was radio if on our time off we would go down to Santa Fe, but when we were up in the mountains, we didn't have radio reception, so we weren't hearing these songs or records played. So again, I can't. Oh, wait a minute! Now it's coming to me. I remember reading about it. This would have been, a record that I had read an article about. I don't know if it was Rolling Stone or it was some other music publication, but they were talking about. And these are almost all of these are covers, I think. But they were talking about their cover of Sweet Jane. And I'm a big Lou Reed fan. And I thought that was pretty intriguing. So when the days on my time off, I went into Santa Fe, I found the cassette of this and started listening to it. And I just fell in love with Margot Timmons' voice. Oh my God. Such a smooth, silky, and strong voice. And she still sounds that way. Just this last year, I went to a live show of the Cowboy Junkies that they put on up in Evanston, just north of Chicago. And her voice is just as strong. And the band is just as tight. It was such an experience. And this album definitely led me, was the gateway into getting more of their material. I will kind of agree with what Robert Fithen recently said in one of his videos about the Cowboy Junkies, because he was talking about Black Eyed Man when it was released, and I kind of agree with him in that is probably the end of their albums where they're really being innovative. And then after that, they become more and more formulaic. I still like many of their later releases. I think they're all really good. And I still really love Margot Timmons' voice. I don't mind the types of songs that they keep sort of singing over and over again. But yeah, they are kind of singing the same thing over and over again. But that's okay with many of them. But yeah, I do agree that was probably the end of when they were truly reaching and developing their sound. And then I think, they hit a really good plateau and carried it forward. But I'm not as enthusiastic about many of their later releases as I am with the earlier ones. But this is the gateway. And maybe it's not my favorite one. Maybe Black Eyed Man is my favorite one, but what is it? Pale Sun, Pale Moon. That's another really good one. But anyway, this is how it all started with the Trinity session. Just an amazing, amazing record. So there you have it. Those are the records that were gateways for me to some of my favorite musical artists during the 1980s. I hope you enjoyed that. Leave a comment in the Down Under. I really like getting the comments. I appreciate the feedback from folks. Hit the like button because that really helps with distribution of the videos. Even if you're already subscribed, hitting the like button is a great thing to do for any video creator that you watch. I mean, if you like it, show that and hit the like button. It helps. And I appreciate the subscription. So if you haven't subscribed, hey, but hitting the like button, that is even more important. I also, you can follow me on Instagram, where I go by the handle of NewsDude76. That's NEWZDUDE76. And then I have a Facebook page called Calvin Wazoo, where I post these videos and other music-related videos and articles. So there it is. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope to see you again soon. And remember to pray for the people inside your head, for they won't be there when you're dead.